Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, StayNTouch Cloud PMS Configuration and User Training Series, Finance Configuration, presented by StayNTouch Implementation Consultant, James Lee. I'm your host, Erin Fisher, the content writer here at StayNTouch. Today's presentation will cover finance configuration in StayNTouch Cloud PMS. In this webinar, we will cover the following topics: charge groups, payment methods, charge codes, including charge types, which include tourist tax and advanced tax rules, items, force adjustment reasons, accounts receivable settings, billing groups, and tax exempt. We will have a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will answer them in the order they are received at the end. And that's all I have right now. James, I'm going to hand the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Erin. All right, let me share my screen here. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for taking time to join our webinar today as we go into some financial configuration. The first thing we are going to discuss is our charge groups, and charge groups are actually going to be located in our settings here. Under financials, we have our charge groups listed here. All charge codes that you create do have to be grouped up into charge groups. And here are our existing charge groups that I currently have in my training environment. If I wanted to add an additional charge group here, I can click on Add New up here at the top, and I can call this, maybe for example, I'm creating a spa charge group. Charge groups also come into play when you're looking at reporting. If I'm looking at financials in my journal, by default, the system will automatically generate or show you your revenue totals by charge group. Just a second for it to load here. And if I click on revenue, you can see that these are your existing charge groups. And then of course you can drill down and see the individual charge codes. Charge groups also display on guest folios. So if I go back to my dashboard here to bring up one of my reservations that are currently in-house, and if I go into bill and charges here, it is going to show your charge types listed up here at the top. So I almost like to consider them like revenue buckets. So they do show up here. When you print folios, you can also print a detailed, or sorry, summary by charge group that will allow you to do that as well. All right, next thing we're going to discuss is our payment methods. So by default, we have a handful of payment methods already listed. We list all our credit cards, cash, check payment, anything you see system defined. These are all going to be things that are already built into the system for you. You do have the ability to add an additional payment codes. For example, I do have a wire transfer here for any kind of wire transfer payments. But let's say I want to add another payment method. When I click on Add New up here at the top, it's going to give me a description here, and we can go ahead and create one for third-party payment, for example. I do need to give it some kind of code, so I can just call this third or something like that, which is fine. We never want to select credit card here because all the credit card payment codes I've already added, so we don't need to ever select anything with a credit card. And you do have the ability to link this to a reservation type if you would like. But at this point over here on the right, I can select where I want to allow this payment. We would probably never do web payments because usually if you're adding something, it's probably being used internally. So I would probably click on Rover payments only to allow this just to be used internally. Restrict post, if you have this payment type attached to a reservation, if you have this restrict post turned on, that will enable the restriction for posting charges on that particular reservation and prevent charges from your POS systems being able to hit the account. But from right here, I can go ahead and save my changes. And now I have my payment method. Now, as a reminder, when you add a payment method, you do have to create a charge code and link it to the payment method, which we're going to get to here next, actually. So I'm going to go into my charge codes. I'm going to go ahead and add a new charge code just to show you how to build these out. But let's say I wanted to build one. I'm adding a spa, so I created that charge type for spa, and I want to go ahead and create my charge code for spa treatments. So I can give this a 4,000. Actually, let's see, this is 45. I think 4,000 is already used, so I'm going to use 4,500. We'll call this spa treatment. Now, when you see these areas for description where it shows translation boxes, you don't really need to put anything in there unless you want to use a dual language or multi-language PMS. If that's the case, then you would want to go ahead and put the description based on what language you have selected up here. If you need to enable multi-languages, you can refer to our knowledge base and it can show you how to do that, or reach out to your client success manager to arrange for some training on that. Allow manual posting. What this option does will allow you to manually post charges with this particular charge code. If you have this turned off, you won't be able to post any charges to that particular charge code. Now, I usually recommend that if you're creating a charge code that is going to be used for your interface postings, so for example, if you actually had a spa system that you're creating these charge codes and they're going to post directly from the interface to these charge codes, I would probably recommend keeping this option turned off because you want to be able to reconcile revenue to the charge codes that are generated from your POS system. If you have this turned on, then you're going to allow your users to be able to maybe post adjustments to this particular charge code, and then it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to actually get everything reconciled between what was charged on the interface and what was actually charged in PMS. By allowing this to not be posted manually, this only allows the postings to come directly from the interface, and then you can create a separate charge code for maybe spa treatment adjustment or spa adjustment, which they could use to make any kind of allowances on guest folios. All right. Charge groups are over here, and these are those groups that we just talked about. So I would loop this to spa. And I don't actually have an interface, so I'm going to actually allow manual postings for this one. Charge code types, these are all hard-coded in our system, and they all kind of do different things. We're going to go through here and talk about the different types. This is a spa treatment, so it's considered to be miscellaneous. Anything that would not be considered a tax or payment or room revenue or any kind of add-ons, you would create this as a other. So if I set this as others, which would basically just be a miscellaneous charge code, and then I can go ahead and save that. Now, if I wanted to add taxes to that, I can actually go back to the spa charge to bring it back up. Taxes are actually added over here on the right, and I can add a tax, enter my charge code here, and let's say I wanted to go ahead and add my New York State tax here at 5.875 and say okay. And then I'm going to add a second tax, and we're going to do our New York sales tax. Now, when you're adding a second tax, you do get a calculation rule. By default, usually it's going to be charge code off base amount. We're just saying the base amount of 4,500 is going to generate 8.875 tax. You do have the option to do charge code plus tax 1. And what this calculation does is it will look at the base amount of the 4,500. It will also look at the tax amount from tax 1. It's going to add those totals together, and that total is what will be taxed at 8.875%. Normally, it's not really done that way. Normally, you're going to use charge code base amount, where it's just going to look at the amount charged from 4,500 and calculate the taxes that way. But you do have that flexibility to do the charge code plus tax 1 if needed. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and save changes. So that's adding a charge code and adding taxes to charge codes as well. We're going to actually dive into the different charge types here because they all have different functions. So I'm going to add new here. The first one we're going to talk about is for add-ons. You may be familiar with add-ons and how they work with our system, but essentially they are certain things that you can create for extra revenue opportunities where you can essentially add them on to reservations. Examples would be like parking, or it could be a package where you're doing a champagne and chocolates to the room on Valentine's Day package. Those are all examples of add-ons. When you build add-ons, you do have to link them to a charge code, and the charge codes that fall under the add-on is what you would link to those. Allowance is future technology, future functionality, I should say. It's not quite ready for prime time, but that will be coming soon, and you'll get some, I'm sure there'll be some marketing material that'll go out regarding that function. AR manual balance and AR manual credit. These are internal codes that are created specifically for finance. AR manual balance is for hotels that are actually cutting it over to our product from a different PMS, and they need to be able to input AR manually. That allows them to do that. AR manual credit is also regarding accounts receivables. This is where if you have an invoice that happens to have a credit for whatever reason, this allows you to transfer that invoice credit over to your credits, which are payments, and you can allocate that to other invoices. It does need to create a charge code for that, and usually your StayNTouch installer will create those for you. F&B is regarding food and beverage. So any charges coming from your restaurants, your bar, in-room dining, all of that stuff you can loop as F&B, and that does show up in some reporting for F&B revenue totals. Fees are not commonly used in the US. What this actually does is it allows you to create a service charge fee on certain payments. Some hotels in Europe like to charge a service fee to use a credit card, and that's kind of what that fees is used for. A lot of people see fees and they think, oh, this must be resort fee or smoking fees, and that's not actually the case. This is actually something that you would create and link it to a payment code, and it would charge the guest a particular service fee to use their credit card or some other payment. Others we already talked about. That's going to be our miscellaneous. Anything that's going to be incidental charges, you can use as others. Payments. So let's say we just created that charge code for, or sorry, the payment code for third-party billing, payment. So I can go ahead and select payment here. When selecting payment, you are going to be prompted to select a payment type. So I can have that third-party payment here. I can go ahead and select that, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a charge code number, and we'll go ahead and get this created. And third-party payment. Charge group is going to be payments as well. And now I can go ahead and save the changes. Oh, looks like that code's already used. Let's try a different code. Perfect. All right. The next one is room. Room is a very important one. So for charge code type room, any revenue that is generated from a charge code that has charge code type room associated with it factors into your statistics of ADR, your RevPAR index, when you're looking at your market segmentation totals, you're looking at room revenue totals. It's looking at all revenue generated from charge code type room. So it's very careful to be aware of those different charge codes that you have set to room, because anything that's going to be posted with that, it's going to inflate your ADR. So things to consider are going to be like your cancellation policies, your no-show. If you don't want that revenue to factor into your ADR totals and your other statistics, you need to make sure the charge code type is other. Now, it's perfectly fine for your charge groups to stay at room. So if you want charge group room to stay, be inclusive of all things room revenue, no-shows, cancellation fees, all that stuff, you can still group it under the charge group room. But if you don't want it impacting ADR, you need to make sure your charge code type is not set at room, but is at others. Other things that you might want to have impact your ADR would be things like your early departure fees, early arrivals, late departure fees, any kind of upgrade charges. Those are all things that you might want to impact your ADR, and you want to make sure those are set up as room. The next one we're going to talk about is tax. So taxes was where, once you select taxes, you will be prompted here where you can actually configure the tax amount. This is where you can, again, we don't worry about fees here, but I can set a minimum amount to charge fee if I would like, or I can set my taxes here. Normally taxes are a percentage, so you would use a percentage here, and you would put your percentage, and then you have your amount type. So taxes can be generated per adult, per child, per person, a flat amount, and room. Now, when I'm creating a tax that's for room charge, I usually just select room, but honestly, flat and room kind of do the same thing. So either way would work. But I'm going to go and select room. And then you have your post type. We have two options here. We have nights and we have stays. If I choose night, which you're probably going to normally choose, it's going to post that text every single night. The other option here is if I do stay, it's only going to post it the first night and it will not post the remainder of the nights. So normally you're going to choose night. Now we'll get to these two options here in just a bit. But I'm going to go ahead and save the changes at that point, and that would save the taxes for me. And of course, taxes can also be dollar amount. For example, New York City, I know they have flat amount occupancy fees and Javits tax. So those options, you could set a dollar amount as well. All right, go back to add new here. This charge code type, next one is called tourist tax. So tourist tax is an option that you can enable, and that an option here is under financials and under financial settings, and you have the tourist tax toggle switch here that you can activate. What this allows you to do is taxes behave the same way. They post like to a room charge, like or any kind of charge code like you normally would. But the difference is that the tax will act independently from the room charge. And when I say independently, I'm referring to routing. So if you think when you set up billing information, which is routing, and you say room and tax is going to go to, B folio, our system is designed that the taxes will always move with the charge that generated it. So all I need to do is say, I want to route room charge to folio 2, and taxes will automatically go with that. Tourist tax acts a little bit differently. Tourist tax will allow you to create taxes added to the charge code, but when you route room charges to folio A, the taxes will not route with it. Taxes will stay on folio, I'm sorry, room is going to room folio B or bill 2. The taxes will stay on bill number 1, so they don't actually route with the room charge. I'm sure you all are aware that Expedia, for a lot of different areas, they're setting up billing where they are actually paying the taxes, or the guest is responsible for the taxes, I should say. In those instances, you can actually create the tourist tax and set up to room tax where it would go to bill number 2, which would be the third-party billing, and then the guest would be responsible for the taxes that are generated on bill number 1. And those are configured the same way. You would select tourist tax here, and it's just exactly the same. It just acts independently from the charge that generated it. Okay. Next thing we're going to talk about is advanced tax rules. And under financial settings here, you do have the option here for tax rules. Which tax rules will allow you to set dynamic tax rules based on different criteria, such as length of stay, room type, date range, and all different kinds of things there. So we're going to discuss a few of these options here for tax rules, and I'm going to actually use one of my taxes that I already have configured. And let's see here. So I'm going to look at my New York sales tax. And let's say New York decides that on June 1st, they're going to increase their taxes to 8.975%. With that option, I can go ahead and enable my length of stay here, and I could add a tax rule. And by adding a tax rule, I'm going to select date range. And I'm going to say it's going to go to 8.975%. And this is going to start on June 1st. And just to cover our bases, I can make it out for 10 years out. I can always come back and change this if tax rules are ever going to change again. And then I can go ahead and save the changes. And now with that added, I can show you if I go into a reservation here, and let's say I'm making a reservation at the end of May, and we're going into June. And I hit find room and rates. Now my tax demo rate where I set everything at $100, and I can look at my standard king here, and you'll notice my tax rate is $59.41 up until June 1st, and at June 1st, it's going to increase to $59.55. So there's my tax increase. All right, so I'm going to go back in here now and take this off. And now we're going to set a tax by room type. So let's talk about my occupancy tax here. And I believe New York City is actually set up this way to where if your room types are larger, you do pay a higher tax amount for that particular room type. So here I have my tax as a $3 flat amount for my occupancy tax, but I'm going to go ahead and enable the LOS again. And this time I'm going to add a tax rule. And this time I'm going to choose room types. And my room types, I'm going to select the room types I want to have a different rate on. So I'm going to select my presidential suite, my junior suites, and I'm going to set this to, I think I had this wrong actually. Occupancy tax in New York is $1.50 and it's $3 for the suites, I believe. So I'm going to set this up for $3 and I'm going to go ahead and save the changes. And now when I go in to sell a room here, and if I look at my standard kings, I can see my taxes are $57.91. But if I go to my junior suite, which is the same rate, my taxes are $59.41 because it's adding $3 for the suites. Let me go back to my settings here. And now we're going to talk about the ability to set taxes by length of stay. Wrong one here. Add tax rule, and we're going to choose by length of stay here. Length of stay allows us to set a tax rule based on the number of nights the guest is staying. For example, a lot of states, if the guest stays over 30 nights, the guest should not be paying a certain tax. So if that's the case, I can say at 0%, we're going to do 31 plus 365. And we're saying after 31 days, the guest should not be paying tax. And this is going to be for the entire reservation. So you'll notice now, if I go back into my room and rates here, and I make a reservation for 29 nights, I'm looking at my tax demo rate here. I can see a total tax of $57.91 each night. And now, if I go back into this reservation, and let's say we want to make this for 33 nights, I hit find room rates, and I look back under my tax demo rate, and my taxes are significantly cheaper because that one tax rate that we have is now set to not post for their stay. Now that is going to cover the reservation for the entire stay, but let's say you have an example where the guest would pay the taxes for the first 30 days and then they would not pay taxes for the remainder of the stay. You can also set a tax rule that covers that. So for example, let's bring back up my state tax here, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this one. With that, I can go ahead and add enable night range. And with this one, I can add a tax rule, and I can say for night ranges, and I can set different tax rates. So I can say from, it's going to always be defaulted to 8.875. So let's say, for example, after 15 days to 30 days, the tax rate is going to change to 5.875. And then I can add a second tax rule where I would say date range, and that would say after, oops, not date range, sorry. Try that again. Night range, and I would say after 31 days to 365, tax rate should be 0. And I can save the changes. And now, if I go back to my roommate screen to sell reservation, and we have it for 33 nights, hit find room and rates, and I'm looking at my tax demo rate, I can see my taxes are going to change. It's $57.91 for the first 15 nights. It changes to $53.86 for the last part. And then after the 30 days, that particular tax will start posting all together, and taxes are only $45.93. All right, so those are advanced tax rules, and that's how you can configure those. The next item we're going to talk about is actually items. So I'm going to go back into settings here. Items are things that you can create and link them to individual charge codes where you can have quick posting. A perfect example of this would be a mini bar, and I actually have some things set up where you can look at here and I can have all these different items linked to a particular charge code. Now, when I create an item, I hit add new here. I put my description up here at the top. Oops. I can add a description translation if I would like, and then I can set my unit price where I would say $65, and I would make this a favorite item. By marking it a favorite, it's going to show up automatically when you go into postings, and I'll show you what I mean by that. If it is not marked as a favorite, the user can still find it, they just need to search for a little bit. But here I can go ahead and mark it as a favorite, and then I can go ahead and link it to a particular charge code, where I would say this is going to be minibar beverage. And then I can go ahead and save the changes. So now when I go to the front end, we'll go ahead and bring up one of my reservations here that are currently in-house. If I go into bill and charges and I hit add charge, I can see those items show up here. And it's very easy for me to just go through and post these charges. And I can post multiple. So if I wanted to do, a few beers here, a few Shiner Box, I can post as many as you want, and it's keeping kind of a running tab here. And when I post a charge, you're going to see the revenue is actually going to be linked to those particular charge codes. And you don't actually see the items here. But for the guest does see the items. So when I print out my invoice, as long as I'm using bill layout of detailed bill items, and you could set this up as default in your stationery, I can print this, excuse me, and the guest will actually see what the items were that they purchased. But for you, all you care about is your revenue totals of what's going into beverage and what's going into food, and those are what those things are linked to. And that's where you'll see your revenue recorded. Now, there is an export called the Financial Transactions Export. I believe that's the one, or it could be the journal. I think it's Financial Transactions. But that export does include a row, or I should say a column, for the items. So you could use that to track revenue by items if you need to. All right. One thing next thing I want to show you is our forced adjustments reasons. We actually just rolled this out a few months ago, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months ago. But this is a feature that some people aren't aware that's there now, but we do have set the ability to force users to select a reason as to why they're doing an adjustment. So if they're posting a negative charge on a folio, if you want the user to be prompted to select a reason, you can configure those now here under force adjustment reasons. This is the option to turn it on, and then you need to add reasons. It's very important that if you turn this on, you need to at least add one reason, because if you turn it on and you don't add a reason, the user won't have an option to select and it won't let them continue. So you make sure that you have to have at least one reason in here. But to add a reason, I can say, I already have other. I can call this per minute or guest a P minute, quoted rate, incorrectly, or something like that. And I can add the reason and then save it. And the way that looks is when I'm actually in a folio here, and I go into bill and charges, if I wanted to make an adjustment, here are my reasons, and it will not let me continue until I select something here and change the amount. All right.
Sorry, Jane. We can't see the screen you were just on.
Oh,
It's still on the force adjustment. Now I can.
Okay, sorry about that. Let's try that again.
No.
So I'm going to bill and charges here, and I can go ahead and make the adjustment. Let's say if I wanted to remove my facility fee, and I have to select a reason. Can you still see it, Aaron?
Yeah, it's just slow. Yeah, now it's loading.
All right, sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, next thing we're going to talk about, not a lot to discuss with this one, but accounts receivables. There's a couple of settings to review, but under financials, under accounts receivables, you do have the option here to automatically assign AR numbers. With this option turned on, the system will generate AR account numbers for you. If it's turned off, then you will be prompted to create your own AR account when you create accounts receivables. This is also where we link our manual credit charge codes and our manual balance charge codes that I mentioned early. Another thing to note is under your cards section and configuration here, if I go into company and travel agency fields, there are some options here that I can make certain information mandatory in order to create an AR account. So I'm saying here, in order to create an AR account, I need an address, I need a city, I need a postcode, I need a tax ID number. And it will not let me create the AR account unless this information is filled out. Next thing we're going to talk about are billing groups. Billing groups come into play with routing charges. You have the ability to route individual transactions, but you can also set up a billing group that would be inclusive of a group of charge codes that you could just say route this one particular billing group, and all those charge codes would be routed to where you direct it. So our billing groups are listed here. If I wanted to add one, I can click on Add New up here at the top. And you'll notice all those taxes that I have, they're not listed here. But I do have my tax for the facility fee because I configured my fee as a tax available to you. This is what we talked about, our tourist tax. So tourist taxes can act independently. I can route a room charge and leave the tourist tax on the guest folio, so the guest would have to pay for that particular tax. But here, let's say I wanted to create one called room and meals. So I'm going to say room charge, and I'm going to do restaurant charges and select all my F&B charge codes. And then I can say the changes. And that allows me to just set up routing, say I just want room and meals, and all those charge codes that fall under that umbrella will hit that. And finally, the last thing we're going to discuss today is our tax exempt types. That is going to be listed here. Tax exemption works by applying it to a reservation, and by applying the particular tax exempt to a reservation, the taxes that you deem not to post will not show up on that particular reservation. Tax exempt types can also be added to groups. So if you have a government group coming in and you need to exempt all the taxes, you could attach it to the group and it will populate to all the bookings for you. But to add a new tax exempt type here, I can click Add New, and I can say exempt occupancy tax for whatever reason. And then I can go ahead and check the box here of all the taxes that I do not want to post in conjunction with this particular tax type. And then I can save the changes. All right. And with that, that's going to wrap up our financials webinar. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Aaron, for any Q&A that we might have from the attendees.
Thanks, James, for that insightful presentation. I'd now like to turn over the floor for some questions. Remember, you can submit questions through the question box in the middle of the control panel. So our first question is from Samantha. With the force adjustment reason, would this be something the guest sees if using a Zest station, or would it only be on the front desk side of things?
It would only be on the front desk side of things. The guest would not see that.
Okay. And then Samantha also asked, can we also get a force adjustment reason for canceling a reservation, thus causing our agents to receive a reason for canceling? In the written box, this would allow us more tracking.
That's a great idea. I would recommend that you submit that as a feature request. And if you want to get some traction on that, you could loop in your client success manager and they could definitely follow up on that. But that is a great idea.
All right. I don't see any other questions. I'll give everyone a few more seconds to enter those. Okay, since there are no more questions, I'd like to take to the floor to offer some final thoughts. So in this webinar, we covered the following topics: charge groups, payment methods, charge codes, including charge types, which include tourist tax and advanced tax rules, items, force adjustment reasons, accounts receivable settings, billing groups, and tax exempt. With that, I'd like to conclude our presentation. Thank you all for coming, and if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me at aaron.fisher@stayintouch.com. Thanks again.